Well, today is the last day of the NATO summit here in Madrid. In fact, it's the last day of 3 continuous summits that the Prime Minister has attended, 9 days outside of the UK. And clearly, the focus remains on the war in Ukraine, Russia's continuing aggression, indeed its scaling up of the war. And we've heard from the government overnight that they're going to invest an extra £1 billion in military support for Ukraine, taking that total up to £3.8 billion. A pretty significant investment. They argue it is part of the need to try and ensure that Ukraine wins this war. We heard from the Prime Minister yesterday when I carried out an interview with him that this conflict in many ways was black and white, that it was pretty clear that Ukraine needs to win it and that the UK and NATO needed to step up its efforts in order to help that happen. And that means trying to provide fuel, trying to mean extra and better communication methods, and also clearly it means better and more weapons as well. In saying that, as the Prime Minister also suggested yesterday, when I kind of pushed him on this idea that Vladimir Putin was evil, he kind of fundamentally agreed, saying that I think it probably follows that if you are what you do, then that certainly seems to be the case. What are we likely to see today? Well, there are further meetings, of course. We're going to hear from the Prime Minister in a press conference later. But frankly, I don't think the Prime Minister, and I did try to push him on this in my interview last night, cannot get away from this row that's brewing at home about defence spending and about cuts to the armed forces. We heard from the Chief of the General Staff earlier on this week, who essentially said that it was perverse to be cutting the army at a time in which there was a war in Europe. The Prime Minister really wouldn't be drawn much on that, suggesting that investment in the armed forces isn't simply about troop numbers, but also about the better military equipment and training that money can provide. But clearly the Ministry of Defence have been pushing this line over the last couple of days, that they think that defence spending needs to increase, not just in the years to come, but maybe throughout this decade, given the threat posed by Russia. And I think we're likely to see this argument really play out in the weeks and months to come. A real concerted effort, almost as the Ministry of Defence rubs up against the Treasury, demanding that extra money needs to be provided. The question is, on which side will the Prime Minister find himself on, the kind of the restraint of the Treasury, or this argument that in the end, with a war raging in Europe, with a direct threat that NATO now says Russia poses to all of us, that frankly in the end the armed forces frankly need more money. As I say, it's an argument that's not going to go away.